This is a moisture meter, but it doesn't actually measure moisture. In this video, I'm going to tell you why. This is the Protometer MMS2. It's a great meter and just one of the meters that we use day to day as we conduct building surveying and pre-purchase inspections. In another video we can talk through the pros and cons of different meters, but for the purpose of this video we are using this. And that's because it offers both invasive and non-invasive search functionality. The difference is one uses a scanner on the back here, and the other, the invasive function, uses these pins which are jammed into the surface that we want to test the moisture for. These things, sure, they're prolific in building surveying and they're used on the daily for pre-purchase inspections, but the issue is that not everyone actually understands how they work, how to use them, and how to interpret the results. If you really want to understand moisture meters, there are some basics that we really need to start with, like how the hell do they work?
Dielectric constant. You're putting out a voltage and you're measuring current, relevance in a vacuum. Well, the wave traveling is not a relevant physical effect, measuring capacitance. Plus, say, I don't know, positive voltage onto one, pumping air into a balloon. The electrons basically fill up the plate like a tank and they get sucked off the other plate, like the opposite of a tank. So you have two electrodes.
So my moisture meter has two different ways of measuring what we think of as moisture. The pins and the sensor at the back. In terms of the pins, what's actually going on there?
Well, it's good we're starting with the pins because they're quite straightforward to explain. So basically what happens, after the pins are inserted into the substrate, we send a little bit of electricity out from one pin, through the substrate and back to the other pin. And if the electricity flows more freely, then we infer a greater presence of water in the material. If the electricity is more restricted, then conversely we infer a drier material.
Okay, so the sensor at the back of the meter, all I really know is that there's two plates and a signal comes out and a signal is returned.
The second main type of meter we have is it's a capacitance type meter. And if you don't know what capacitance is, it's a little bit hard to understand. But basically, if you imagine, it's the ability for electrical voltage to store energy in an electric field. What does that mean? Well, imagine you have two plates and you put some voltage between them and some electrons are going to flow from one plate to the other and they're going to be stuck there, kind of like a static electrical charge. If you've ever stepped out of your car and got an electric shock, or rubbed a balloon on a plastic chair, or rubbed your hair on a plastic object, I mean, basically electrons build up on you and effectively, you're one of the plates of the capacitor in that respect. If you imagine that, storing electrons on a plate, much like a static charge, how many electrons can you store on a metal plate of a given size, given a particular voltage? Well, it actually depends on the material in between those two plates, something we call a dielectric constant. Dielectric constant of air is about 1, and that number means nothing. All that matters is the relative difference in that number for other materials. Concrete, for example, I think is about a dielectric constant of 4.5, which means if you had concrete between those two plates, you can now store 4.5 times as many electrons on one of those plates than you could if you just had air between them. And then other materials, such as water, have a much higher dielectric constant. I think it's somewhere in the range of 80, which means if you have water between those two plates, assuming that water is not directly touching the metal, because of course water conducts electricity, you can now store 80 times more electrons on those plates. And that's basically what we're measuring. We're measuring the dielectric of the material that we're pointing our sensor at in the context of a moisture meter, because we're measuring capacitance, and from that we're inferring the dielectric constant. And by knowing the dielectric constant of the material that we've pointed our sensor at, basically we say, well, if it's high, it must be because of water. Because water has such a high dielectric constant, of course, that's going to have a very high effect on the reading, as opposed to, some screwed up pieces of newspaper in the wall, for example, might change the dielectric constant a minute amount, but of course, water is going to affect that reading a lot more.
So now we know the science behind this thing, I should probably build us a wall. This wall is typical of one that you might find in residential construction in New Zealand. We have a 90 by 45 H1.2 Pinus radiata timber frame. We have 10mm jib aqualine wall linings, and we also have a 60 by 20 MDF bullnose skirting. What I'm going to do is use this wall to demonstrate how to use our moisture meter. But before I can demonstrate how we use this thing, I need to tell you what the numbers that we're going to get actually mean, and that depends on how we use the meter. If I use the invasive pins here like this, the units that I'm reading in are WME %. That stands for wood moisture equivalent percentage. That tells you that this type of measurement is designed primarily for timber. This meter is actually advanced enough that I can change the type of timber that I am testing, and the meter will calibrate itself appropriately. So I'll show that now. I'm going to set it to American pine, and I'm going to test, and I get 17.2. I've saved that record. Now I'm going to change it to American oak, and I'm going to put it in exactly the same spot with the same pressure, and I get 15.7. We can also use these pins for testing plasterboard as well, but as the meter isn't calibrated for that type of material, we have to be careful about how far we read into those results. Finally, it's important to note that this type of testing is not going to work on some materials like concrete or fibre cement. Now, if we use the rear of this sensor, we can actually test all types of materials, but the units that we're measuring in are simply a relative value. And that means that we're not getting a fixed percentage moisture content. Instead, we're working with an abstract figure. In order to make that figure representational and give the reading some meaning, then we need to measure the same material in a known dry state, kind of like setting a datum. We can do this by taking a moisture reading on an internal wall that we know is very unlikely to have any moisture ingress issues, and this is called a reference control point. So we're going to do that now. So our reference control point here is 116. From here, if we started to measure other alternative areas around the property and we see readings that are significantly higher on the same material, this may be an indication of moisture ingress. But emphasis on may. These things can get thrown off by all sorts of things. To save a little bit of time, here is a non-exhaustive list of all the sort of conditions that can and will affect the accuracy of this meter. So to give you an example of how these conditions can affect this moisture meter, I've got a couple of props. So the first one is a steel weight. If I test over here on our wall and I get 104, and then I introduce a steel element in behind, it pops up immediately to 146. That's quite a big difference. If I take my sponge and I wet this surface here just slightly, as it would be if someone's just had a shower and we're testing a bathroom, I get 217, dry it off quickly, and I move back over to a known dry point and I get 104. Big difference, right? Okay, so how do we physically take the reading? Every meter is going to be just slightly different, and it pays to read the instructions for your specific meter. But I'll give you an example of where things can go a little bit astray. It's really important that you hold the meter correctly when you're using the pinless mode. So as an example, if I hold the meter like this and I just have my finger slightly towards the back, then I'm immediately going to throw the meter off. You can see it's already showing 104, which could potentially affect all my readings going forward. It's really important that I have my fingers or my body entirely clear of the back of the meter, and you can see why that is really important. We want to place our meter down flat on the surface, like so. When we're scanning along, we're looking for significant changes. When we find, or if we find a significant change, we can then start scanning around the area, making our arcs bigger and bigger as we go, in order to establish and pinpoint the area in which the moisture readings are going to be the highest. That then gives us some data that we can work from when we interpret the readings. If we are using our pin meter, we want to make sure that we are pushing the pins in as far as they'll reasonably go without putting too much stress on the meter or the material. So just a couple of mils is normally fine, but we want to make sure that our pressure is constant. So where should readings be taken? Well, everywhere there's going to most likely be a leak. That's the ultimate goal here. So corners of openings in the cladding, windows and doors, adjacent to showers and baths, on the rear walls of tiled showers, and wherever else there might be visual indication of potential moisture ingress. Readings have to be interpreted within the context of all the other information available. This tool is exactly that. It is not a building surveyor itself, nor could it ever be one. The person using the tool must interpret what it is that the tool is telling them. These things are massively over-relied on, and assessments for potential moisture ingress have to be undertaken holistically, as jumping straight into pulling wall linings off is really expensive and can be a stressful mistake for everybody involved. So these are just some of the questions that I'll be asking myself when it comes to making an assessment. Things like, how risky is the building design? Where is the location of the issue in relation to the building? What sort of claddings are adjacent? What is the condition of the claddings? Are there visual signs of moisture ingress apparent? What sort of substrate are we dealing with? Is there condensation on the wall? Did someone just come out of the shower? What were the weather conditions recently? So as you can probably tell, there's a lot more to it than just whipping this thing out and taking a few moisture readings. All of the assessments have to be undertaken holistically, taking into account all of the information available in order to give the most accurate information we possibly can to the parties involved. If you think that we missed something, or you want to know a little bit more about something we discussed in this video, please do leave us a comment. Thanks for watching.
Sorry, it's probably too technical. People won't know what DC or AC mean, right? Let's